Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living podcast and YouTube broadcast. Thrive Co-Living is a new concept in creative community building. Sustainable, multicultural, multi-generational, and inclusive, Thrive Co-Living communities are built from repurposed big box stores or other suitable buildings. In this series, myself, Jennifer Hooper, and Thrive founder, Mark Stein, will weave together the tapestry that makes up the physical and spiritual components of this new concept in community living. Now on with the show.
Okay, so I'm really pleased to have Ajay Kumar from Bangalore with me today, and he is he's got an awesome perspective on co-living especially over in Asia, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of those similarities and differences in our focus. Um, he's also created software for the co-living, student housing, and other types of communities, rental housing, called thehousemonk.com. I think we're going to get together another time just to focus exclusively on that. But um, we were introduced by a mutual friend, and we thought we would just have our intro conversation as a podcast and record it as a podcast. So thanks very much for meeting with me, and I look forward to what we want to chat about. So
Definitely. Thank you
so
so much,
welcome.
Mark, for accepting this invitation to talk. Actually, I think I wanted to speak to you more than, you wanting to speak to me. Really happy to be here, and very interesting that even the first conversation is kicking off as a podcast and, not just as a regular Zoom conversation. So excited to see where this goes.
Good. So why don't I, uh, since you're my guest, why don't you start out with any topics that you'd like to talk about, or things that you'd like to focus on?
Definitely. I think there are multiple points that we can talk about. But I think the first thing that is really standing out, right, is with respect to how co-living and rental housing is essentially evolving so differently, right, in different countries. And one of the points that I found most interesting about Thrive was the focus on community and, how it's more than just more than just, a solution for housing. It's more of a social solution, for essentially people to find a community of like-minded people to live with. And that is something that I find very interesting because in Asia and in multiple other countries and multiple other continents or regions in the world, rental housing is more focused on providing a space for people to live. Community is a byproduct, but space is essentially what the customers are looking for. Another point to be mentioned here is that rental housing is essentially a solution for the younger population in a lot of these markets, and not really targeted at. It's not multi-generational. It's not targeted at older people. It's essentially for people in their early to mid 20s to find a solution to live, and it's also targeted at lower income groups, as a solution for them because they might not be able to afford to buy their houses, right? Compared to, once again, in all across Europe and the US and in Canada and a lot of our clients in these regions, it's become very explicitly clear that it's not really for the young specifically, although the youth do contribute to a very big portion of the target markets and the people who are living in these facilities. But it's not something which is specific to young people, and it's kind of like more from the perspective of anyone who is who can think the way the rest of the community thinks. They have access to our facility. So I think that might be a very interesting point, to kickstart this discussion with respect to how it's serving different needs in different markets.
Great. Okay, well, let me focus on that a little bit. So the main problem that I think we want to solve is solving this problem of the epidemic of loneliness and feelings of
Mm-hmm.
separation that,
Mm-hmm.
at least in Western countries, and you guys are getting more and more digital as well. Um, I went to the beach not too long ago, and I was walking along the beach, and families were together and couples were together and everyone was on their phone, you know. So I think that technology and my work as a digital marketer is promoting this. I think that the dependency on technology is leading us further and further apart in our relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Here also, uh, attendance in religious groups is way down. Attendance and membership in civic organizations like Rotary um, and different organizations like that, that participation is way down. So I think increasingly, and then you put in technology with that, increasingly it is more and more difficult for people to find their place, find their people. Um, and here there's a lot of construction of rental apartments, and the typical one looks like a four-story building. Sometimes there are clusters of them. um, they may have a, recreational facility. They may have a pool. They may have a workout room, but and even a common space for gatherings. But I don't get the impression that people are doing that. They're not mixing. I feel like most people are going into uh, their own unit and watching their own big screen TV and
Mm-hmm.
not interacting. So,
Yep.
and I've read a lot of articles about that. So I think it is
Mm-hmm.
true, and that's the main problem that we're trying to resolve is to is to get people together and have programming, all the types of things that co-living communities do, but to really focus on that and to use technology, and that's something we might talk about as well since you're into tech, to use
Mm-hmm.
technology to foster that,
Mm.
and to come up with a platform, because I do think that co-living communities have a need for technology that's different from a Facebook group or a Facebook
Yeah.
page. Um,
Yeah.
and I know a lot of them use WhatsApp, but there are a lot of limitations there.
Yeah.
So and actually as a tech person, I'm interested in the possibility of building something like that that is
Yeah.
focused on building community. Then the other
Yep.
thing, the other point you made was about uh, our multi-generational focus. And
Yep.
I know it's mostly around the world. It's mostly 20 somethings and 30 somethings that are in these units. They're almost always rental. They're not
Mm-hmm.
owned.
Yep.
Um, so we're, in at least in the U.S. and in Europe, it used to be that multiple generations, it was common for them to live under the same roof, at
Mm-hmm.
least three generations. And
Mm-hmm.
and that in the West, that doesn't happen very much anymore. So I feel like there's something that's lost there because younger
Mm-hmm.
people can definitely share the enthusiasm and creativity with older people, and older people have wisdom, um, and experiences and things to share. And
Yep.
because we're separate, we're not creating that. So
Yep.
that's my main motivation of getting everyone together. And
Mm-hmm.
in my age group, uh, and I consider myself an old hippie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we our generation was focused on building community, and there were a lot of communes, literally communes, that were
Mm-hmm.
created and were popular during the 60s. So I think my age group is very interested in that as we get older.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
artists of all ages and
Mm-hmm.
creatives of all ages would be interested in it. So,
Mm.
so I think, and we see some co-living communities that are built around themes like artists, creative types getting together,
Yep.
or entrepreneurs
Yep.
getting together. So,
Yep.
so I do really want that as a focus, and I'm also hoping to bring in young couples or couples with young children as well, so that,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to do some things around co-learning that would be combined with a co-working space and
Mm-hmm.
have multiple generations learning and growing and sharing together. So let me stop. I'm going too long. What are some of
Uh,
your thoughts?
I, I think it's a very interesting point that you've made about multiple generations living under, essentially the same community. I turned 30 next month, and someone was asking me like, how does it feel, and like, what do you think about that? And I was telling them that a lot of my late 20s has been realizing that my dad was right all along. And I've just been realizing that my dad gave to me his advice when I was a teenager, all the things which I rejected back then. And I'm simply under, oh, it's all correct. Oh, yeah, he was right all along. He was right all along. So, that's essentially what I've been learning. And I completely understand the perspective that everyone has something to share, right? Like whether it's a teenager, whether it's someone in their 20s or 30s, whether it's someone much further down the line, everyone has something to share. If you have the attitude to learn from everyone and to essentially coexist and look at someone as an individual and not really judge them before you meet them, I think you can become friends and get along with essentially everybody. This entire uh, point, right, like that whole like young people stay with young people, like like families, and middle-aged people stay with middle-aged people, old people stay with old people. I think that's a broken concept of how a community is built. I think good communities are built where you have a great blend of people. And last year, I think when I was in Europe, I was in Berlin. There was this super interesting conference which happened on a very similar topic. It was about blended living, as they had actually termed it, and it essentially talked about the same thing. Having students, having working professionals, having like like parents, and like older people. What happens when you build a community with everybody together? And I found that to be a very very interesting topic. Super interesting that it's not yet permeated into society. Although it seems like such an obvious thing, like why shouldn't this? Well, why isn't this? How everybody lives. So very interesting that it's not yet a thing, but I think it's a better version of our future, right? One where people kind of like like blend and have a peaceful coexistence than how society and living standards have been formed today. So I think that's a super interesting thought.
And I listened to your podcast on Christine's show, The Co-Living
Mhm.
Code, and I
Mhm.
listened to I listened to a lot of them. And whenever
Mhm.
she asks, essentially, what is the holy grail for co-living, almost everyone mentions multi-generational um,
Mhm.
housing.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are trying to make that work. And one of the ways that I think we're going to be able to be successful with that is that we're
Mhm.
not looking at a rental model. We're looking at an ownership model. And let me just
Mhm.
share a little bit about that. Um, I did some research into co-ops, and co-ops are mostly up in the U.S. or mostly up in New York, and
Mhm.
they're very common. In fact, most residential or a lot of residences are in a co-op setting. And the one way to do it is what's called uh, an unlimited. I'm not getting the term right, but an unlimited equity co-op where whatever you sell it for, you can sell it for whatever you want when you're ready to
Mhm.
move out. And in a co-op, you don't own your footprint, you own shares in the entire operation.
Yeah.
Another another version of that, and the one that we're looking at, is a limited equity co-op. And
Mhm.
what that does is it caps your ability to sell it. You get some profit out of it, but not whatever the market will bear. And
Sure.
the reason I like that is that those things tend to escalate and price people out. And I do want ours to be affordable, so and affordable to multiple generations. So
Mhm.
we're looking at our main unit being a 1 or 2 bedroom condo a loft condo, sort of like what I have as my backdrop here, and about 1,000 square feet, and at a price point of about 250. And that 250 is not just for your condo; it is for a share, 2 shares of the entire facility. And I think that, and I do believe that there are some people that will want to buy them as an investment, live there some of the year. We want to create our first one down in South Central Florida in the Tampa Bay area. So I think a lot of people would want to spend the winters there and maybe other times of the year. But my hope is that they'll want to rent them out when they're not there and do
Yeah.
so at maybe at their cost, so that it's not, the rent is not very high. And I think what we want to create is a sense of ownership and not have a revolving door where lots of people are coming in and out, but to have a more stable, maybe 75% are residences, permanent residences, and 25% could be opened up to rental. So that
Interesting.
we've got that sense of ownership in the community and more continuity, which I think will help us do programming better, get to know each other better, and that sort of thing. And maybe make
Interesting.
it more stable than
Hmm.
most of them that are more rental oriented. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's, this might be one of the most interesting concepts that I've heard, and I've spoken to so many people in the co-living industry. I haven't heard of too many people who are looking at it from the perspective of a co-op, right? I think everyone's essentially looking at it from the perspective of from a rental perspective, right? Saying, hey, there's going to be an asset owner who's going to create the asset. There's an operator who's going to build the community and manage the rentals, and the tenants are essentially going to be paying rent. And it's a landlord-tenant relationship, at the end of the day. So to say that, hey, we're going to flip the switch completely, and we're going to make this more as a co-op where you buy into the community. You're not thinking of it from a 1 week or a 1 year perspective. You're actually thinking of it from a super long-term perspective, where you're buying into you're buying into the community in every sense of the word. So I think it's a very, very interesting concept. We I think another point that you might be onto something is saying that your first facility is going to be in Tampa Bay, Florida, right? Which is not really the big, metropolis where, we're used to seeing a lot of other co-living facilities come up. Where I think in the US, it's very much, like a phenomena like centric around like New York and Boston and San Francisco and LA and all these other, like urban metropoles. And so where, a concept like this might not take off immediately because it would definitely be expensive. Even if it is a co-op, it's still going to be super expensive. But whereas I guess, in Tampa, Florida, I don't think it might be as expensive as it would be in other places, making it a lot more affordable. Definitely something that can work in your favor is that there is so much of talk and discussion around never returning back into an office, simply saying, hey, everyone can just, work from anywhere. So that's once again, like increasing the odds that people can be working for a super high tech Silicon Valley company, but they don't need to be in San Francisco. They could just be working out of, like Tampa, Florida. And these might be people who might be paid a lot more, and it might be super affordable. So they might only be able to afford maybe like a small studio, like in San Francisco for the same amount. Whereas, potentially in Tampa, Florida, they might be able to really upgrade their lifestyle. So there's so many reasons why, I think, this can potentially work out. We were actually discussing a slightly different model for this, not as a co-op, but we were discussing how, how potentially, not really an operator, but even a landlord or a private equity fund, when they're launching a co-living space, they create the asset, they rent it out, but directly they put it out as a REIT, like onto the public market. And any tenant, who's interested in looking at this from a long-term perspective can, potentially just buy shares in the REIT, right? So that they get an ownership benefit as well. And, just seeing, whether there is a play where the REIT owner or the landlord essentially can, give incentives for tenants, who are essentially buying the REIT. So we were discussing a concept like this. which is very similar to what you're doing, but like more from a super capitalistic perspective.
Right.
But yeah, but to us, like that made sense as well, because at some point, I think people want to own their home, right? So people are not going to remain renters, like forever and ever, or that's not going to be the bigger portions of population. People want to rent when they're young, but by the time they feel like they want to settle down, they want to make an investment in real estate. They want to be in a place where they can see themselves being for the next 5 years, 10 years. So just the other day, I was discussing with somebody saying that, at what point does co-living go from simply being a young person and renter phenomena to something that becomes, as we've already discussed, something that becomes multi-generational, where do we sign ownership? So I think it's a very interesting concept that you're working on. I'm personally very excited to see, how this pans out over the next few years.
Yeah, and another problem it solves is the initial investment. So let's say we're looking at a model of 100 units and
Mm-hmm.
averaging 250,000. There will be
Mm-hmm.
some studios, there'll be some flats, there'll be some 3 bedrooms so that we can have families. So there'll be different
Mm-hmm.
price points. But let's just say on average 250,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's working capital of $25 million. So
Mm-hmm.
um, we're looking at buildings that cost anywhere from 4 to 6 million, and the build out would not take the difference uh,
Mm-hmm.
of those numbers. So instead of having to find an investor to put up the
Mm-hmm.
funds, we'll be able to, and these are they're financed much like a traditional mortgage that
Mm-hmm.
you would purchase a mortgage. It's just for shares and not for the footprint. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the other thing that we're doing to sort of pull the profit motive out of our model is that we've
Mm-hmm.
created a not-for-profit corporation that
Mm-hmm.
is devoted to developing these different communities. And
Right.
once we do the first one, provide technical support because we would like to create them in other cities. And I'm looking at
Mm-hmm.
second tier cities, but cool cities like Austin, Texas, and maybe outside of Washington, D.C. But some and some mid-sized cities like Nashville that have some real
Mm-hmm.
energy, in Charlotte, North Carolina. So,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually we may be able to do this in a New York or LA, but
Mm-hmm.
also look at the property
Mm-hmm.
values there so much higher. So
Yeah, I think a very good way to approach anything in real estate, but definitely specific to co-living and the concept that we're discussing as well, is that I think every location there is a demand-supply disparity, right? And the only question is, do we have more supply or do we have more demand? And once you get to the answer of this, like you can really figure out which aspect, are you going to be playing in. In markets with high demand, it's only a question of creating supply. In markets with high supply, it's only a question of creating demand, right? So, and I think that's the crux of, how we look at it. Typically in cities, demand is never the challenge. Demand is almost perennial. Of course, there's a pandemic that's going on, which is, like driven people out of cities. But that aside, definitely, I think people will return back to cities. There's a reason why we constructed cities in the first place. There are physical network effects which are simply hard to get over. So typically, when you're looking at it from a city perspective, like the demand always is available, and there is always a captive demand as well. It's really a question of can you source land, to essentially construct anything that you want to construct, right? It's super difficult to take a multifamily apartment and kind of retrofit that into a co-living space. That doesn't quite work because like for so many reasons, right? You would ideally prefer to build from the ground up, but once again you don't get access to land. Getting permits is super difficult in cities as well. Figuring out zoning laws and where exactly this is going to fit into the picture. And once again, sourcing capital becomes its own set of challenge because there's a lot of money that just goes into tried, tested, proven real estate asset classes. Like our institutional investors, completely willing to create co-living assets. So many questions that are looking for answers. With respect to constructing new assets in cities, I think that's where the opportunity lies right now, where we look at, as you said, whether it's Charlotte, whether it's Kentucky, whether it's Louisville, whether it's Tampa, all of these cities essentially offer a promise that people might not go back to cities. People might be willing to, like upgrade their lifestyle in exchange for, like being in a tier two city as such, where everything is a lot more affordable. But it might just not have the same level of vibrancy or energy as, like a New York or a Los Angeles might have. But I think that's a real decision that people are actually looking at. So maybe it might make sense to create new supply in these cities as well, in the hope that the demand that is leaving the tier one cities, essentially finds their way into tier two cities. So definitely, it's a very interesting time to be in this space.
And people are definitely fleeing New York. I think I saw 10% occupancy, or not 10%, 90%, but occupancy is way down. You know,
Yeah.
we've been focused mostly on the West, and I was fascinated to hear your take on, since you
Mm-hmm.
are focused on India,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you got some knowledge about China. The scale of what you're working with in India is just incredible. And in many ways, I think we could safely say that in India you're further along. Yes, it has a different flavor, but
Yeah.
it's much more prominent. So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about your experience. And you've been a provider of a co-living facility. Just talk a little
Yeah.
bit about your experience and what it's like in India, what co-living is like there.
Sure. So to set the context, India has about 1.3 billion people. China has something in a very similar ballpark. So the thing that I find most fascinating is that people from other countries just do not understand the scale, right, of the population that we have. So to set the context, it's a huge country with a lot of people. The second point to keep in mind is that we have a very young population. The average age of an Indian is about 23 years old. So it's a very, very young country, right? So we have a lot of people, going to school, going into college, graduating, and looking for a job, or they've essentially got their first job. So we have a huge, proportion of our population who are super young.
And a lot
Co-housing.
of them, let me interrupt. A lot of them are entering the tech sector, aren't they? Especially in Chennai and Bangalore, um,
Yes.
and and that's new, relatively speaking, right?
So we have we have about I think 1 million engineers who graduate every year out of engineering courses. So that's a lot of that's a lot. I'll have to double check the stat, but it's in that ballpark, between 500,000 to 1 million engineers graduate every year out of colleges here. So that's a lot of people, and a lot of them end up in the technology sector. So a lot of them, by technology, we really mean software. So they create software for large enterprises in US, Europe. They create a lot of products which are used across the world. So we have a very it's 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 a high energy sector, I could say, right? Like, so that's essentially what a lot of the young people today here hope to do when they're going, or essentially teenagers, right? So they want to get into engineering, they want to graduate and they want to work for a large technology company, or they want to build a technology company by themselves. So as you said, right, like a lot of cities like Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, Gurgaon, Noida. So a lot of these cities are essentially, I think the economy of these cities is, these are all, like mini San Francisco's, like in a sense, right? Like, so a huge portion of the local economy is powered by, people who are looking to enter or who are already in the technology industry. So there's a lot of such people. That's another point to keep in mind. Shared living and co-housing or boarding houses, or as how it's referred to in by different names in different countries, but co-living has been around in India for a couple of decades, I would say. I think early in 2000s itself, when there was mass migration of people from villages and small towns, into cities, essentially to work in the tech sector. We have this thing that we call locally as paying guests, which is very similar to the concept of a boarding house, or like co-housing as it's known in a couple of other in a few countries as well, where essentially you have maybe anywhere from 10 to about 100 people staying within the same building. right? And it's kind of like, or it's kind of like managed by an operator. Today they're all called co-living operators, but they've been called paying guest operators or PG operators more locally. That business has actually existed for like a couple of decades, I would say. Just that it was never happening in a structured or an organized way. And that is essentially the opportunity that we're seeing right now, or that's essentially what's been happening in the Indian co-living movement for the past 7 to 8 years, where a lot of new age entrepreneurs and a whole bunch of people who have been involved in the real estate sector, they've been looking at that particular segment. People in their early to mid 20s who do not have access to high quality accommodation, although they have the purchasing power, to spend a little extra, right, to get access to good quality accommodation. And there's a lot of such people here. Okay, so given the scale of our population, there's so many people who actually fit that bill, and that's what co-living operators have been doing. They've either been convincing investors to create new assets, for this population, and then they've been like operating on these assets, or they've been taking existing multifamily apartments and kind of like retrofitting it to suit a co-living lifestyle, or they've even been taking single family rentals, or they've been taking up a few apartments and large condos, and essentially like retrofitting all of these facilities, putting in furniture, putting in high quality internet, and making it available for the younger generations of society. And that's essentially what's been fueling the growth. We have about I think I would say like we have close to about 200,000 people who stay in organized co-living facilities in India today. We potentially have, I would say, maybe about 5 to 10 million people who are already staying in unorganized facilities. So it's a pretty big market opportunity.
And mostly the focus is on providing a safe, relatively comfortable place to live. They're not plush.
Yeah,
Describe
so I
them.
think we look at it as um, like we think of it as like affordable, premium, super premium, right? So we kind of like split it into three categories. There are co-living operators who focus on different categories as well. So the affordable category is essentially what used to be like the paying guests, which were like the bread and butter, bare necessities, but done in a little more modern way. So that's what we call as the affordable category. Then there is the premium category where there's like much better quality furniture. The rooms are a little bigger, better, like better quality internet, all of that. So that becomes the premium category. And then there's a super premium category as well, which focuses a lot more on the community, like maybe like better quality food, like a lot more social events which are being organized. So there are like multiple levels at which it can happen. So once again, given the scale of the market, there are multiple opportunities that exist. So so operators have been, so a lot of operators have kind of like figured out what is their niche. We do see people playing across the field as well, but we do see people focusing on one of the three segments by themselves. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. I think the challenge here, right? Like what I notice is a challenge in India, which I know is a challenge in China as well, which is essentially the core challenge I think in most emerging economies, is that you can build scale very quickly, but the margins in the business are a little limited. So for yourself as an entrepreneur to build a business which is of meaningful scale for yourself, you have to build a huge scale, right? So you need to have like thousands of rooms, or thousands of people living in your facilities for the entire thing to make sense. So that's one of the key points, to keep in mind. That okay, so let me maybe give a quick context of what I used to do before I started building software. So I've been in the real estate space for about 6-7 years now, and initially we started off doing a lot of services in real estate, like broking services, investment advisory services. But eventually we found ourselves being a rental operator. So we focused on co-living facilities, student housing facilities, family housing facilities as well. We built out a portfolio of about, we had a whole bunch of properties, but we had about 1,500 to 1,600 people staying across, like multiple properties we were managing across 3 cities in India. Uh, the biggest challenge here becomes, how do you scale up the offering, right? So co-living is such a touch and feel industry. It is extremely operationally intensive. So many manual touch points which you cannot automate, or which is very difficult to automate. And how do you digitize these interactions? How do you automate these processes? How does it scale, right? And so in India, one of the funny points is that, like, even though we had 1,500 people staying in our facilities, we were not even in the top 10 operators, right, in India. Like, so there are people who have tens of thousands of of beds or rooms or properties under management. Um, and so we were like way outside, and like we were having a lot of challenges scaling. So that's essentially when we built the software, which is today the HouseMonk, right? So that's when we built the software for ourselves to help us streamline portfolio operations, to help us drive more online bookings, to help us like automate a lot of offline processes. And at one point we realized that we might just uh, the larger society might benefit if we just license the software to other operators, because everyone's going through the same challenges, right? Like, how do you streamline operations? How do you engage the community? How do you do all of this in a much better way? So that's when we started selling the software to other companies, and that's that's how we find ourselves where we are today.
Awesome. And I do want to hear more about the software, but let me ask you this while I'm thinking about it. So with these massive facilities and these numbers of people, how are they faring during COVID? It just sounds like it could be a hotbed for COVID. How are they
Oh
doing?
yeah. Uh, so in India, we've had a very challenging time during COVID with respect to the co-living industry. Pretty much everyone has gone back to their hometown. People who were staying in co-living facilities, or people who were staying in paying guest facilities, everyone has essentially gone back to their hometowns. They've gone back to, so everyone's essentially living with their parents. So the occupancy rates, I think, are hovering anywhere between 20 to 40%, depending on the city and depending on a lot of factors. But yeah, so there has been a very big drop in vacancy, and that's essentially how people have. That's how the customers have responded to the pandemic. They've just gone back. But I would say the operators here have done a very good job of doing a quick response. So a lot of people have like digitized. So for example, let's say someone's coming to deliver food, right? So you order takeout, someone's coming to deliver food. So operators have moved very quickly. Like, they've implemented contactless parcel management systems, to ensure that these things are done well. All movements are tracked, much better, using, so there are temperature guns everywhere, there's like masks everywhere. People have, so even the booking and move-in process, which used to be super offline earlier, a lot of things have been done to digitize that process as well. So I would say the operators have moved pretty quickly, and they have implemented a lot of solutions to reassure customers that they are taking the pandemic seriously. Um, I think the demand would come back to the market in a couple of months, but as of now, like given where we stand today, the occupancy levels are pretty low.
That's very interesting. And I'm finding that there are a lot of industries that are seeing an acceleration of trends that were happening anyway. And
Yeah,
I think this is an example of that, where these operators are working at a much lower level, but they're seeing they're increasing their ability to digitize their processes and getting more efficient, so that
yeah,
once they come back, the people come back,
yeah,
they'll be a
yeah,
lot more efficient, and tools like your software,
yeah.
can really help. Um, or
Let me give you a let me make a point here about software adoption in the industry in itself, and this applies to multiple industries. This is more of a market phenomena. Let's say between let's take the example of India versus the US, right? So let's say it doesn't matter what the industry is. Let's say you have two ways to do this. You can either do it offline, wherein you have a physical representative from your company who's going to do something, right? Something manual. And let's say option two is that you're going to automate that using some software, right? Now, in the US and in Europe and in all the and in all the developed economies, it's super expensive to hire full-time resources. It's very expensive to have people on a salary. So let's say that you're going to pay $5,000 a month to keep someone on a salary to do a given process. versus, let's say, paying maybe $500 a month or $1,000 a month for a software which can automate the same process. It's a no-brainer, because you would just use the software. The challenge that software companies face when selling to audience in emerging economies in countries like India, Vietnam, Indonesia, huge parts of South America and Africa, is that cost of labor is very, very cheap. It's not expensive to hire people over here. So a lot of companies, what they really do is that instead of using software, which might cost them, let's say, maybe like $500, they would simply employ somebody who would actually cost them maybe like $700 or $1,000 a month, right? So the cost benefit was not very high. Where when you move from using physical labor, to using software, and that was one of the biggest reasons why companies were not adopting technology quickly. Now, this is not just in real estate or in co-living, like I'm talking manufacturing, consultancy services, agencies, like, across the economy. Now, interestingly, what COVID has done is that it's not really a question of cost or price anymore. Customers simply are demanding it. They don't want to meet, or, like they don't want to have offline touch points with representatives of your business. They simply want to do it online, more from the perspective of safety. And
Right.
that is starting to accelerate, technology adoption. So I think if there is a silver lining, in this super dark cloud, I think it's the fact that it's going to help propel automation and software, forward in some of these countries.
Hmm. Definitely. Let me ask you this. Are classes, uh, let's say college classes, because there are a lot of students there,
Hmm.
are they being held
Hmm.
online now so that the students can go back home and attend their
Yeah.
classes virtually?
Yes. So I think both with respect to schools as well as universities, classes have started online. I was speaking to my sister the other day, and she has like two kids. One is, I think, my nephew is still in kindergarten, and my niece, I think she's in fourth grade or fifth grade. And both of them are spending time in front of their laptops because their classes are happening online. So yes, so both schools and universities have moved on to online education. The universities are facing challenges with respect to new intake and admission, because in India, like, we have something similar to the GRE and SATs, which happen in the US. We have our own entrance examinations that students have to take, before they can get into university, and these exams are not held online. So these exams are held offline. These are, pen paper exams, and they happen at scale, right? So we have millions of people, taking these entrance examinations every year, and we have not yet, as a country, we have not yet been able to hold these examinations, nor have we been able to, hold them digitally. So because of that, the new intake has not yet happened. So I think the freshers, or the first year college students, so that admission process has not yet started. Even the exams have not yet happened. So I think that might happen maybe by October or November. But I think for the rest of the students, it's kind of back to normal with respect to, I mean, at least classes are happening, and it's happening digitally.
Mhm. So I keep putting off hearing about your software, but let me not put it off anymore because I am a developer, a software
All
developer,
right.
more on the marketing side.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very interested in it, and I know a lot of people that are that are watching are very interested. So, and
Yeah.
I promise we talked about this offline that we'll do a podcast just
Yeah.
on demoing the software. But why don't you
Yeah. Yeah.
talk about the different features and the different challenges that you're trying to solve?
Definitely. Uh, a one-line summary would be that the HouseMonk helps real estate businesses market, sell, and manage their portfolio. So we help our clients, establish an online presence with their website, start driving online bookings, and end-to-end manage their portfolio with respect to whether it's rent collection, addressing customer support queries, engaging the community, whatever, facility management, visitor management. So whatever comes with respect to portfolio management. So market, sell, manage. We have an end-to-end suite of tools, multiple tools essentially, which help our clients achieve all of these goals. We primarily sell the software to, I think we have like three categories of clients that we sell to. rental operators, including co-living companies, student housing companies, senior housing facilities, multifamily, single family. So any kind of, like anyone who's in the business of managing any kind of real estate from a rental perspective. So rental operators are a big customer base for us. We sell to real estate developers to help them, go online, find customers, market their projects. We also sell to property and facility management companies who are more in the business of, keeping an existing facility intact. So we have close to 100 customers spread across about 12 countries right now, scaling super quickly. More than the number of customers, like we're extremely happy that our customers are very happy. So that's something that we focus on quite a bit. If someone asks me, what is one reason why they should sign up to our software, I would definitely say it's because of our customer support. We have noticed extensively that there's a lot of software in the world, definitely a lot of software in the real estate management domain as well. But we feel that software developers do a very good job of building the software, but they do a terrible job of providing a great experience to customers who are interested in using your software. So we say one of the points that we mention extensively is that chatbots are outdated. It's time to bring back human connection. So one of the things that we do is that as soon as you sign up with our platform, we set you up with a human customer success manager who's going to be with you, like through and through, who's going to help you get the most out of the software. And it's a very simple, SaaS-based model, as in you pay a small monthly fee for using the system, and it's a win-win, right? So if you're not happy with the software, you're going to like unsubscribe, and if you're happy, you're going to stay with us. And we have almost a 95% customer retention. People who sign up with us, they simply stay with us throughout. And I think I would say maybe it's 40% because of the features that we have. It's possibly 60% because of the great customer support that we provide. So yeah, so that's about the HouseMonk in a nutshell.
That's awesome. How long were you in development to create it? Not that you're not still and always in development, but get it out the door.
It's very tricky. It's very tricky because we built it for ourselves, right? So our previous company, which was essentially a rental management company in itself, was called Cozy Homes, and we launched that company in 2015. And very early in the process, we realized that we needed to build our own property management software because there weren't really too many good property management software in India. So early 2016, we hired like an engineering team to start development on the product. So the first version came out, I think, early 2017. But then by the time the product became good enough for us to adopt internally, it was possibly 2018. So it was about 2 years before it became a good internal product. It took 1 more year from there for it to become a commercially viable product that we could sell to the open market. So by I think mid to end of 2018, we started getting customers on pilot. But I think by early 2019, the product was good enough that we could start selling it to companies who did not know us. Essentially we came out of a beta version into a full-fledged product. So yeah, so I think it was about 2 to 2.5 years essentially was the full development cycle.
Do you also collect payments on the website for the providers?
Yes. So we actually have a very robust set of accounting tools. So let's say that you're an operator and you're looking for collecting rent, which is one of the biggest use cases that people use our system for. So you can automatically invoice your customers on the starting of every month. We come pre-integrated to I think about 6 or 7 payment gateways. So you can automate the collection so customers can pay through the app, or they get a payment link via email. They can make the payment, hits your bank account, automatically gets reconciled. And we have a bunch of advanced features as well. For example, let's say that payment needs to happen, let's say by the 3rd day of every month. You can automate reminders, in case people haven't paid by the 3rd, like you can send them an automatic reminder every day. And let's say beyond the 5th, you can schedule, multiple reminders for them every day. If people are late beyond a given date, you can automatically impose a fine for people who are paying late. So you can do pretty much everything to manage your receivables from your customers.
That's awesome. And I gather that credit card adoption is way below what it is in the West. It's probably growing. So you probably have you have to provide a lot more payment options for people.
I think it's a very interesting cultural phenomena that Living on credit is not really considered a very good thing over here. So people really want to spend money that they have. They don't want to spend money that they don't yet have. So credit card penetration in India is very, very less. I think most emerging economies, it's a very similar story. Like, people don't really want to spend money that they haven't yet earned. So people pay more from their debit cards or ATM cards. The government here has actually built a new technology called UPI, which is Unified Payments Interface. It's a very seamless way for you to make payments through your app, through your smartphone. So it's a one-click technology. So the adoption of that has increased rapidly. So in India, like, digital adoption has happened very quickly over the last 5 years. Smartphones have become very, very affordable. India actually has the lowest rates for mobile data across the world. So it's super cheap, to have a great data package. So to give you a sense of the numbers, I think most people here, they consume about 1 GB of data per day, right? So, and that comes in your basic plan. So that's not like a top end plan, that the mobile carriers here offer. That's essentially what everybody has over here. So it's very, very cheap to have data. Like, the quality of internet connections have been picking up over the last couple of years as well. So yeah, so there's a lot of interesting things happening.
And again, this COVID is going to accelerate all those changes,
Yeah.
Well, I bet you we could talk for another 3 hours nonstop, but it feels like a good break point. And
Yeah.
we'll definitely schedule you for 6 weeks or so out and do an episode just about the software.
Yeah.
And let's talk about some of these other things that we've just scratched the surface on. So
Definitely. I would definitely look forward to that. And, maybe we'll work on a couple of other agenda points to discuss in the next call, and, we'll take it from there.
great. It's so great to meet you and to hear your perspective on things. And with your developer background, your provider, facility provider background, and software, you're just in a great spot to really, pardon the pun, to really thrive in the industry. So
that's true. I think one of the points that I keep mentioning is that to build a great business from a long-term perspective, I think you need three things. I think you need to really love what you're doing. You really need to be good at it, and the market needs to be conducive, right? So you need all three things to work in your favor to build something meaningful, which can last a long time. And I think I'm incredibly lucky and privileged to be in to have all three work for me. I really like being in the real estate, rental, co-living. I really like being in this domain. I think now is the right time to do this because across the world, there is so much momentum, right? Like behind us, because I think like there's an organic need for people to find access to, good quality housing. So, that's coming back into focus. And I really hope that I'm good at doing this as well. So, I really believe like we're at the intersection of this, and that's something that we're excited about.
awesome. Well, thanks so much for the
Fantastic.
conversation, and let's stay connected, and we've got lots to talk about, lots to share.
Definitely, Mark. Thank you so much for your time as well.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Thrive Co-Living podcast and YouTube broadcast. To discover more about our mission, activities, and how to find us on social media, please check out our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. There you can also learn how you can support this creative vision in community co-living. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon.